Hello, BookTube. Well, it's Wednesday, and that's New Comic Book Day, when neck-bearded nerds and neck-bearded neo-Nazis go to their LCS, their local comic shop, where they stand around reading new issues instead of buying them, and don't even mention that they have 100 issues in their pull list box. And the new comic shop simply wasn't on my route today. It was close, but it didn't quite happen. I would have, had I gone, I would have gotten the latest issue of Conan the Barbarian and the latest issue of Justice League, both of which have been wonderful. And if I get to the new comic shop tomorrow or on Friday, I will certainly get those issues. But one thing that I wouldn't have got, because it wouldn't have been at my comic shop, is listed as coming out today in specialty shops. And it's a bit of Turnabout, BookTube. Lately, I have been delighting in torturing your TBRs, showing you all sorts of goodies so that your list gets longer and longer and longer. And today, my TBR is being tortured by comic book specialty stores. There is a thing whose technical release date is today. I am sure that it would not have been at my local comic shop. That I've been on the fence about whether or not I want it. It's a box set, but it's not just any box set. It's called Earth's Mightiest Box Set. It's a box set of Avengers hardcovers, and it's $500. It's a bunch of hardcovers and a poster, and a lot of the things that are in here have never been collected in hardcover before, but it's $500. Now, I would show you a picture of it, but unfortunately, I don't have an iPad. I'm filming on my phone, and I don't have an iPad. I had an iPad 2 that worked like a charm for a decade. And then it gave up the ghost. And one of you very nicely sent me an iPad 1, a first-generation iPad, another plow horse of a machine that had obviously worked well for 10 years, but shortly after I got it, it gave up the ghost as well. So, just as a side note, if any of you actually have an iPad 2 or later, that you have upgraded from and it's just sitting in a kitchen drawer somewhere, feel free to sing out in the comments field. I don't want to you get all grabby hands on something that you actually use. But if you have a tablet that works fine, that isn't outdated to the point where no apps will work on it, and you don't use it anymore, I can give it a very good home. But I'm not sure how much a picture would show you in any case. It would just be, it's a gigantic box of hardcovers. All great runs on the Avengers, which is, for those of you who maybe, I can't imagine anyone who doesn't follow comics will watch Comic Book Wednesday, but just in case you are drawn in by my sultry come hither charisma, the Avengers is a super team, a team of superheroes. If you don't know it from the comics, you'll certainly know it from the movies. But it started in the comics in the early 1960s, where Stan Lee decided to bring together a bunch of already recognized marquee heroes and put them on a team together. The catchphrase for the Avengers ever since has been, there came a day unlike any other, where a threat arose that no single hero could defeat. And on that day, the Avengers were born, as a team that bands together to defeat menaces that they couldn't do individually. And that was flagrantly wrong for the original Avengers, for certainly that first issue. The first issue is just the Norse god of mischief, Loki, making trouble on Earth for no particular reason whatsoever. And when you take a step back from that first issue is legendary. It brings together Thor, of course, Loki's half-brother, the Norse god of thunder. It brings together Iron Man, the Hulk, and Ant-Man and the Wasp, who are brought together by a teen brigade who use their shortwave radio. It's a bit of a long story. The technology, certainly, in the first issue of Avengers doesn't date well. But if you take a step back from the sentimentality of that first issue, you see that it most certainly wasn't a case of on a day arose when a threat came like no other. Thor has been beating his brother at this kind of thing for thousands of years before that first issue of the Avengers. And he beats him handily in this one too. So, I mean, the full promise of that tagline was realized later, as the Avengers roster grew and changed, and as the threats became better, became more worthwhile, than just the villain of one of the heroes, who we routinely see the hero defeat that one villain in his own comic book. So we're not really in any doubt that if he teams up with 5 other people, he will be able to win. Instead, the Avengers went on from there to have it was Stan Lee and Jack Kirby for a long time, and then Jack Kirby left, and it was Stan Lee and Dong Heck, Dick Ayer, whoever Stan Lee could get for those issues. And then eventually it was Stan Lee and much better artists, and then Stan Lee gave over the reins to Roy Thomas, a bunch of other writers, and a bunch of other artists, and the team kept growing because the motto was once an Avenger, always an Avenger. So if Black Panther became an Avenger and then his duties took him away, well, it could be that 10 issues later, on the whim of the writer or the exigencies of the plot, Black Panther would be back with no big deal. Unlike, for instance, the Fantastic Four, Marvel's first superhero team, which is as much a family as it is a team, and where if there is someone going into battle with the Fantastic Four, they're extra. They're not part of the team. And it's a big deal when somebody does become part of a team. I don't know if any of this applies now. I don't know. I don't read the Avengers now. I don't read the Fantastic Four now. But I'm talking about their first 50 years of life, when I scarcely missed an issue. And because of that, because you have new writers, new artists, because everybody has their own wild idea of what makes a great story for the Avengers and what doesn't, there are, like any comic that's been around that long, there will be troughs and then there will be peaks. There will be peaks of story arcs that are just fantastic, where a lot of times you know that when you're reading issue by issue, you will suddenly say, oh wait, something here is gathering momentum. This is going to be a great arc. And sometimes you'll almost always be right about that. It's only once in a while that you look back at an arc and you think, boy, that was incredible. Why didn't anybody like that but me? And this Earth's Mightiest box set is collecting a whole bunch of those arcs. I want to read you off what's on there. I jotted down what's on there. And these are all hardcovers. These are all hardcover editions inside a slipcase box. What I wouldn't give to see the thing, but $500. Good Lord. So first they collect the first 16 issues of the Jack Kirby and Stan Lee run on the Avengers, which is great in terms of raw material for the future of the series, but not all that great in terms of what's going on issue by issue. Certainly the Avengers become more dramatic and better realized later on. Then the next one is the Kree-Skrull War, which I've mentioned on Comic Book Wednesday before, where Roy Thomas had the inspired idea to have an intergalactic war in which Earth is only a small part, in which the war, everything doesn't revolve around Earth. The Avengers just get dragged into it. And eventually, the climax of the Kree-Skrull War is a little nod to the specialness of Earth, and it's wonderful to see a roster of heroes just dwarfed by the events around them. No wonder the Kree-Skrull War has become a classic. You could tell while you were reading it that it would be. But it's been collected many times, and the first few issues of the Lee Kirby run have been collected many times. The Lee Kirby run runs from issue number 1 to issue number 16. And I don't remember off the top of my head. I should remember the numbers wise, but I think that ends right as the team changes completely, and the roster becomes Captain America, Quicksilver, the Scarlet Witch, and Hawkeye, and that runs for a while. And fans love that. They were initially skeptical, but they love that run. And I don't think that run is in here. But then the next thing that's collected is the Avengers Defenders War in the 1970s. In addition to the Avengers, which had a big, bustling roster. Marvel also tried out a non-team, the Defenders, which had no official roster, no official meetings or memos or code of ethics or whatever. They were just an alternate super team, largely but informally led by Doctor Strange, but they also featured the Hulk. At times they featured Submariner, sometimes the Silver Surfer. Valkyrie was on that team, Nighthawk, a third-rate Batman ripoff of a character. Sometimes they would have Damon Hellstrom, the son of Satan, a character from the 1970s that had a couple of good turns. Every once in a while, Yellow Jacket, who was Hank Pym, one of the founding Avengers members. He took on the alternate identity of Yellow Jacket initially because he was losing his mind, but then once he regained his mind, it's a long story. All of Marvel is a long story. But every once in a while, when Hank Pym wanted to be someone other than Giant Man, Goliath, or Ant-Man, he would be Yellow Jacket. And a whole bunch of other people. The Defenders also had a rotating roster. And in the 1970s, there was an inspired idea to introduce a MacGuffin, introduce a couple of villains, in this case Loki, but also Dormammu, which a lot of you will know is the villain from the Doctor Strange movie. And orchestrate situations in which the Avengers and Defenders fight. They don't fight, you know, like you would see in Captain America Civil War, where they just run at each other en masse. Instead, they split up and fight, so that we can see how they fare against each other. The Submariner fights his old World War II comrade, Captain America. Although in that issue, he appears not to recognize Captain America or ever to remember that they fought that they fought on the same side during World War II. It was a little bit before Roy Thomas started tinkering and really laying out that backstory with the invaders and whatnot. And Valkyrie, who is she's a super strong Asgardian warrior, she fights the Swordsman, who was a loser of an Avenger. He used to be a villain, and then he became an Avenger and never caught a break. It was always fumbling, always losing, and eventually getting tortured and then killed. And Doctor Strange fought the Black Panther and Mantis, who was another classic 1970s era Avenger, sort of grass-skirted martial artist, and at a time, keep in mind, when the Black Panther was basically Captain America without a shield, facing a guy who could turn the whole population of Earth to bunny rabbits simply by asking to have that happen. So it was kind of a non-match there. The Vision and the Scarlet Witch fought the Silver Surfer. Iron Man fought his old nemesis Hawkeye. But the highlight of the Avengers Defenders War, the climax of the Avengers Defenders War, sporting it was Defenders number 10 with a classic John Romita Sr. cover and crisp, beautiful artwork by Sal Buscema. And the highlight, of course, of the fight between those two teams was Thor versus the Hulk. I doted over that issue. I love that issue. It is fantastic. The fight choreography makes no sense whatsoever, but it doesn't matter. At the time, Thor versus the Hulk was the premier thing in Marvel Comics. Fans loved it. They'd have bought an issue every month that had that. But it only happened 2 times before this, and once off camera. So this was just manna from heaven for comic book fans, for an issue where Thor and the Hulk square off and fight. It was just awesome. And they're reprinting the Avengers Defenders War in this. Then the next one, what do I have jotted down here? The next one is the Celestial Madonna series, which is bonkers in the extreme, but so good. Another classic storyline where you knew right away that it was going to be remembered forever. The Avengers have a great villain. He has yet to appear in the comic book movies, so a lot of Avengers fans don't know him, but he is one of the great Avengers villains, Kang the Conqueror, a man from the far, far distant future who grew bored with his peaceful, orderly existence in the future and decided to travel into the past in order to test himself, in order to feel wild again. And he has a number of different identities. He traveled into the past at one point and became the Scarlet Centurion, but he also traveled into the past and became an Egyptian pharaoh, using futuristic technology to wow the natives. And all of that was still Kang. And in the Celestial Madonna series, he gets wind that there's a Madonna in the 20th century, and that the rumor is, the prophecy is, that whoever marries the Celestial Madonna will be the father of the ruler of the universe. And Kang wants a piece of that. So he goes back in time and figures the Celestial Madonna has to be one of the Avengers. And he kidnaps 3 of them. He kidnaps Mantis, the aforementioned Mantis. He kidnaps Wanda Maximoff, the Scarlet Witch. And he kidnaps Agatha Harkness, who's just on the south side of 150 and knows that she is not the Celestial Madonna. Why Kang bothers to kidnap her, I have no idea. He must know that too. Obviously, the fans of the series were thinking the Celestial Madonna must be Mantis. What other reason would there be for this ridiculous character who has antenna coming up? She's not anything like the Mantis in the Avengers movies and Guardians of the Galaxy. She wasn't anything like that. But the Celestial Madonna series is amazing. I was eating it up as it came along, not for a whole bunch of different things. First of all, you got a sense early on, Mantis and Swordsman are a couple, and there's been a torturous love quadrangle going on in the Avengers for a year now. When the saga starts, you have a feeling that the Celestial Madonna series will probably bring an end to both their stories in one way or another. But there's also Thor. The Avenger Thor has always had a bug up his butt about Kang the Conqueror. Kang drives him nuts. with his delusions of godhood, with his grandeur. And Kang's not all that fond of Thor either. They square off a number of times, and boy, oh boy, it's seldom better than in the Celestial Madonna saga. And it was also one of the first times where the Avengers made use of their double-sized annual issues, their giant-sized annual issues. Ordinarily, those were standalone stories, just big stories. But in the Celestial Madonna saga, the writers decided to incorporate the annuals to make them part of the continuity of the whole series. Brilliant idea. Really gave the space for the story. So glad to see it in this thing. Then what is next? The Korvac saga. Not one of my... It's a fan favorite Avengers saga where they face off against a character who eventually basically has the powers of a god. Simply unbeatable. And it was never a favorite of mine because the artwork is not my cup of tea. The artwork is why I buy these things. And the artwork on the Korvac saga just didn't do it for me. I read it, of course. And the thrilling payoff of the Korvac saga is that because a couple of characters in the storyline, for good or evil, have total omnipotence, they have the power of God. Because of that, the writer in the epic battle at the climax of the thing has the luxury of having a supervillain actually kill Avengers. Because you're not going to be beholden to it. Because if you have somebody with the power to just wink and change it all, then you can do that at the end. So it was a rare Avengers storyline where, you got to see what a super battle would really look like, if that weren't totally forbidden by the comic books. So it'd be fun to read the Korvac saga again. Then we have what's next here? Oh, Avengers Under Siege. The last great work that John Buscema did for the Avengers, where for once, finally, a whole group of supervillains, as many as there are Avengers, decide to think about what they're doing, to try and take the Avengers down systematically, schematically, to think it out ahead of time. They've got great technologists on their team. They've got a great thinker on their team, a great strategist, and there's also got a ton of muscle, a ton of superpowered muscle. And they decide very carefully to pick off the Avengers one by one, to use the element of surprise, and they come close to destroying the whole team. Very close. It's just a couple of happenstance mistakes that they make that no one could have foreseen that allow them to be beaten. In addition to which, at the last minute, Thor makes a reappearance. Thor is kind of the deciding factor in any Avengers storyline, at least in the comic books. In the movies, he's been depowered. At least he was depowered in the original movies. The early run of Marvel Cinematic Universe movies, he's a tough guy with a hammer. It's only after Thor Ragnarok that we see the Marvel Cinematic Universe giving us a Thor somewhat close to the power level of the comic book Thor. The Thor that you see making a triumphant battlefield reappearance at the end of the last Avengers movie, wiping out a whole battlefield of superpowered villains with lightning easily without even straining himself, that is the Thor of the comic books. So when he makes a reappearance in Under Siege, that changes everything. Even though at the time in the comics he's operating under a drastic handicap, but it doesn't matter. It's still Thor. So that's wonderful to see that that's going to be there. I have Under Siege in a trade paperback here somewhere. Really good to reread it. And then the next one is a source of joy for me. It's the Gatherers saga by Bob Harris with great artwork by Steve Epting, and it is a perfect example. For years and years, for decades, it was a perfect example in my mind of an Avengers run where I would say, why don't other people like that run? It was obviously great. And obviously somebody at Marvel must have thought the same thing, because this is going to be in there as well. They're double dipping for their trouble in reprinting the Gatherers saga. It's a great Avengers team. It's led by the Black Widow and done really well there. It's got a rogue immortal called Circe. It's got Hercules, but by then he's been wonkered with and depowered enough times so that he's not a game changer. He should be. He should be the same as Thor. And when he originally appears in the Avengers in the 60s, he is just effortlessly unbeatable. The writer, and it was mostly Roy Thomas at the time, had to come up with a whole bunch of new and tricky ways to sideline Hercules, because if he was in battle with the Avengers' enemies, he would just win. But by this point, by the time you get to the Gatherers saga, That's not quite true. I wish that weren't the case. But unfortunately, in Avengers Under Siege, Hercules is one of the major casualties in a scene, in a sequence that just fans will never forget. Any fan who's ever read it will never forget it. Just brutal. But the Gatherer Saga, the reason I mentioned that they're double dipping is because it's in this box set in a hardcover, which would be wonderful. I'm not sure there would be $500 worth of wonderful, but it would be wonderful. But I think next week, the whole Gatherer Saga comes out in a paperback by itself, just in one of those epic collections from Marvel. I think that's the case. I think I remember reading that. In which case, I'll be first in line because my issues are falling apart. I've read that series so much. And that might also be a canny bit of marketing on Marvel's part, because there's a lot of rumors that Marvel wants to bring the Black Knight, a character called the Black Knight, to movie screens. Just add him to the roster of Marvel Comics, and maybe the Eternals as well. The character Circe is an Eternal, and maybe that would work. I don't really know. I don't really know. By the time the Gatherer storyline appeared in the Avengers, the Black Knight also had been monkeyed with quite a bit. For instance, he didn't have his enchanted sword. He used to have an enchanted sword, enchanted by the wizard Merlin, that could cut through anything, that could deflect energy, and that was psychically bonded to the Black Knight. By the time we get to the Gatherer Saga, he basically has a lightsaber. And I'm not really sure off the top of my head what happened to his sword. That's Marvel Incunabula that I don't really know. But what is the next one? Oh, the next one is the Morgan Conquest, which is a great run. It's a fantastic run. The last great run of the Avengers, as far as I'm concerned. Fantastic artwork by George Perez, where the sorceress Morgan Le Fay rewrites reality into a medieval world in which the Avengers live and work as her royal guardsmen, but they don't know themselves. They don't remember their past as Avengers until one by one they start to remember their past as Avengers. And the artwork is just amazing, just incredible. I'm a little bit confused why it would be that storyline from that great run. That great run takes up 3 separate paperbacks of reprints, and it's all great. I'm not quite sure why it would be that same run. I'm blanking right now, just off the top of my head. I'm blanking on the writer. Might be Mark Waid. The artist is George Perez for most of it, and the highlight, I think I'm not the only one. I think pretty much all Avengers fans would say that although the Morgan Saga is really good, the highlight in that run comes later when the Avengers fight Ultron and almost lose. I would think that would be the highlight from that. I don't know why that wouldn't be on here, especially since I'm noticing that Ultron isn't in here at all. I'm not sure why that would be. Ultron has, that George Perez saga with Ultron is really good, but there are 2 others that are also really good, and they're not in here at all. Also, very little, if any, John Byrne, the fan favorite writer and artist John Byrne, had a couple of runs on the Avengers. For instance, you could squeak by and put his West Coast Avengers run in here. His West Coast Avengers run is really, really good. It's not quite the Avengers, but they're all classic Avengers characters. But anyway, what have we got? Then we have a hardcover of Avengers Forever, which was a 12-issue miniseries that is incredible. I want to recommend it to people, but unfortunately, it is the ultimate insider baseball gift to Avengers fans. You could not hand Avengers Forever to someone who didn't know their Avengers continuity backwards and forwards and have them make anything out of it at all. They wouldn't make anything out of it at all. The story doesn't make sense unless you love the Avengers and have been reading them forever. It's the ultimate just mint on the pillow gift to longtime Avengers fans. I love it. Absolutely love it. It basically, it stars a small roster of Avengers. That roster eventually grows to be every Avenger who's ever been, and quite a few Avengers who are from alternate realities we've never seen before. But the real star of Avengers Forever is the aforementioned Kang the Conqueror, who's just never been done better. And the artwork is amazing, just amazing. It also has been reprinted many times, but boy, oh boy. And then after Avengers Forever, we have Avengers Dissembled, which was a storyline where basically the Scarlet Witch, the aforementioned Scarlet Witch, goes rogue and destroys her team one by one, bit by bit. I liked the artwork in Avengers Dissembled, but the story seemed to me to be all over the map. So that was kind of where this $500 box set stumbles just a bit. And then the last thing is Avengers The Final Host, which is from 2018. I don't know that story at all. And that was what did it for me in terms of TBR torture. Not well, that and the price. $500 for a box set of Avengers hardcovers is a bit much, especially when I have most of these storylines in other collections. But what killed it for me is that I don't like Avengers Dissembled much, and I don't know Avengers the Final Host at all. So, you know, and those things matter when you're talking about $500. If this had a couple of great George Perez runs, if it had a couple of great John Byrne runs, if it had other things in place of those, I would have been a lot more tempted. Anyway, that's your Comic Book Wednesday for today. It's not really a comic book that I can show you, because the ones that I would have got today if the comic shop had been on my route would have been things we've seen before. I am now regularly collecting Conan, and I'm regularly collecting Justice League because they're both incredible. But it wouldn't have been anything special to tell you about. Instead, what I'm telling you about is a thing that I'm not collecting. I would not have seen it at my comic shop. No comic shop is going to have a $500 box set just sitting around. You're going to have to order it if you're a dyed-in-the-wool comic book fan. And I don't know. I don't think I ever will. I mean, it's weird to think. It would be great to have, but I don't think I ever will. I will mull on it, and I will get back to you. But in the meantime, we'll move on to books from here. Thank you, BookTube.